Next slide, Henry.
No, next slide. All right. We didn't think
You're in
this through
charge.
very well.
Yeah, yeah, yep. Next one on.
Next one.
So, kia ora, everyone. If you don't know me, I'm Steve Rodkiss. I'm currently a teacher at Burnside High School. I was a lucky, by lucky chance, managed to bump into Henry about 2 years ago as he was starting his PhD to try and create a system that could make our lives easier. And I have worked with him over the past couple of years with this NCEA Auto. I just wanted to cover, if we go back a slide, Henry,
All
um,
right. We're back now.
that one, yeah. I just wanted to cover some of the challenges that we had with the new level one. One of we'd always done programming, but we had the difficulty with the standard itself. The new standard was supposed to be simpler and more accessible, and that was the whole goal of it. But as you all know, we're all coming at it from different angles and different experience. Sometimes using different languages. It's hard to write a generalist kind of assessment schedule that can meet everybody's needs. The schedule that was written also contained a couple of rather we could say like qualitative words rather than the quantitative words, which made Henry's life incredibly difficult to be able to quantify what a descriptive variable name and succinct variable name might be, or what documenting the program with comments that clarify the purpose, which is why we'll cover a little bit later why the system it still requires teacher input, and the teacher has complete power and overrule anything the system comes back with. But what it does provide is the opportunity for a super consistent grade system, whether you choose to listen to what the system provides with you and make some adjustments within it, or whether you go with it 100%. What it does provide is that ability for us, for the first time probably ever, to have a system that if we use it across the country, we would literally all be on the same playing field and marking with the same schedule, which is kind of crazy. The other thing that Henry's system did, without preempting the advent of ChatGPT, he managed to make it AI proof. So you have a system where you write inside of the webpage, and you can't use even VS Code now comes with AI built in, and so this system helps us to kind of like the nice I call it like the value of assessment, because you can go on and use the assessment to do outcome, and you can do a ton more programming over the year. But the level one outcome and programming, they're actually we can assess outcome, but the programming you have to assess them either with one or the other. Level one, they're exclusions now, and so they put the band-aid off. You basically teach them how to program, and then you do the assessment and you can program what you can at that point, and then you know where you stand for it. If you choose to continue on doing outcome with programming, awesome. If not, you've already got 5 credits potentially in the bag, and then you can go on to the next part of your thing. The one thing I did want to say before I kind of hand over to Henry is next slide, please, Henry. There's a ton of places. I don't want to teach grammar how to suck eggs. You guys all know how to. This is not about that. It's about you can choose any way to teach your kids how to program. One recommendation is that Grok made a specific NCEA level 1 course for us that covers only what's required at level 1 NCEA, so Grok Academy. It still exists, believe it or not. We had some issues with it, but it has a complete course that covers all that's required from 0 to hero. I've been running through it with classes this year. Some have flown through in a few days, and others have taken. Are still doing it. I'm sure you're probably in the same boat as me. But you can use anything, any one of those resources. There's tech stuff. There's W3 Schools, obviously a couple of videos there. That's like one of them's only an hour long, but it promises to teach you Python in an hour. That'd be great. And Code obviously Code Combat, and that's basically how you do it. And I also wanted to add with the next slide, Henry, to the next slide, Henry, yeah, to not be afraid. What you're seeing on your screen right now is literally an excellence level solution to one of the code problems that you would find in Henry's tool. This is it. This is all that's required to meet every single criteria in the NCEA Level 1 assessment. It's using I'll not bore you with all of the details, but this will be 100% the excellence criteria. One of the issues we had with the moderators last year was that once the kids have written this, they have, I guarantee you, tested it against the sample data, and they have tested it against the boundary and exceptional data tests that they made themselves. However, the tool did make it easier for kids to just use the check button, even though we limited it to 3 tests. So Henry's made some amazing improvements to how it reports on what the kids do, their code behavior inside the tool. And with that, just one thing to leave all the questions till the end. There will be 20 minutes for us to answer all your questions and for you to have a little play with this. And I will hand over to Henry.
Right, hello, I'm Henry. Good handover. Thank you, Steve. So what we have is NCEA Auto, or NCEA CodeRunner. And so I've updated this to include the 2025 courses, and the way that this differs in the main way, or the main way that this differs is when we do an example course. Each of the students were shown 3 randomized questions. We've changed this now so that they are shown just 1 randomized question. Steve would know a bit more than I do, but I believe this makes the reassessment easier now, because students haven't been shown 3 questions, they've only been shown 1, and so they can try again with a completely new question. But what we're more interested in is, we start the preview, it pulls by 8 questions each with 10 different random variations, so there's a pool of about 50 questions. I think it's more, but going to have questions. What we do is they were questions, we have the last question, we've changed that was existing, and now we just see 3 example cases, and not all with multiple cases, or last cases. I'm going to do is compare for us for the entering the ACG, so I'll try one, maybe heard this. Right, the ACG, yeah, and that's like I entering over. So we start here, no, exactly. So it's like we provide that. Yeah, so we met a lot of the students, and that's going to go like, but I was going to take the thing if they say the NCEA projection, so we change to make it here set to the A, and so make things, we test again, so I'll test code, ECG and TTA, and then type out over again. Then I'll test my code the second time with the ACT, TCA, and I'll type over. Then I want to see what my code there's on some unexpected cases, so ATN, that's my name, Steve, over. So I've tested my code a few times, I check it. All the students will see, again, they get told they passed all test cases, it will come up as green whether they passed the achieved merit or excellence level. and they are only seeing these first three test cases, but they can also see up here in the example box. So they can check as many times as they want over and over again. They're not going to get any extra feedback beyond these example test cases, and these test cases are all designed to be at the achieved level, so they're only seeing examples for achieved. They need to think of their own boundary cases, they need to think of their own excellence cases. As teachers, we can see more test cases that are run against them. So here are some achieved test cases, and some mirror ones here, which are testing some boundary cases, and some unexpected test cases. Then we get a recommended grade. Based on the feedback, we recommend that they get the excellence grade, but there will be some human checking that's required. We then come down to what is referred to as the teacher table, which outlines every single criteria of the standard. There are 9 of them, and explains why your student's code did or did not meet each of the criteria. So they need to use a suitable programming language. That means they need to store 2 types of data in variables. So I list all of the variables and all of the types that they are. I list all the places they use selection, which is all the if statements, all the places they use iteration, and the lines that it can be found on, whether they use the collection. There are some human elements that are required, so they need to determine if they use succinct and descriptive variable names. So here are all the variable names that they use. Here are the lines they appear on. You can decide if they are succinct and descriptive. That's the human element coming in. Same with documenting the program with comments that clarify the purpose of code sections. We did try using LLMs to grade this. It didn't work very well. And so here's the line where the comment appears. Please let us know if it's a good comment. And when we come down here, we see that version 1 that I wrote, but now here's version 2 of my code. And here's those 3 tests that I ran against version 2. And so if we were to look at a real student example, which one of Steve's students has very kindly offered to have us show, we can see the question they asked, note that it's entirely from the question that I asked, the really question, from their code. And we can see that they were only seeing these 2 test cases throughout the entire 31 minutes and 45 seconds that it took them to answer this question correctly. All they were to see were these 2 provided test cases, these provided example test cases. But Steve can see all these other test cases that were run. Steve can see what grade we recommend for a student. He can see the question that they were asked. This breaks down everything that I talked about before, all 9 of the criteria and the standards, all the comments that exist, all the variables that exist, whether or not they use constant variables or derive values in place of literals. And we can see this was version 1 of the student's code. They ran a test, it didn't work. They made some changes to version 2. They ran a test, it still didn't work. They made some changes to version 3. It still didn't work. They made some changes to student 4. They tried to divide by 2.
That's why.
Made some changes to version 5. When did your students program start working? It started working about version 6. Version 6, they made some changes, and you can see there's an iterative process. They went through, it went back to not working, but the student had an iterative design process. They were running tests every time they made changes to the program. We can see the history of all of the versions that they've done, all the way from version 1 to the eventual, what appears to be version 8, version 19. They eventually stopped writing at version 19. This is the code they submitted and what they got for that code. And if you want, you can also save it as a PDF and download that and send that off to NCEA and say, you wanted evidence of testing and debugging? Here you go. Here's your evidence of testing and debugging in a 27-page PDF generated for you. I do have a software engineering student who I'm supervising this semester. His one job is to make this PDF look nicer. And so hopefully that will happen shortly. But for now, it still has all the data there. You can still send off to NCEA and say, here you go. Evidence of testing and debugging has been shown. So that's the key change to take away is that now students are only shown the example test cases, and every time they make a change to their code, they should be using the scratch pad to run their tests, and that will log all the versions of the code and all the tests that they run, and so now we have evidence of testing and debugging. Right, that was a quick rundown. Steve, have I missed anything that you think is important?
No,
Okay.
that's a pretty good output. That what Henry was talking about with the randomization, there is, and maybe later on when we do have a bit of a chat in the chat there, we used to have 3 questions, which gave, because it's a bit worrying if you get they're all about the same level, but one might be harder than the other for a specific kid. They might not quite know how to answer one because they can't quite kind of comprehend the initial problem description. So we used to have 3 questions, and then it would offer those 3 questions. The discussion that we had was that if you do that, then potentially, because there's only a pool of about 10 questions, potentially if you offer a reset later on, they might get the same question again. There's randomization within the question, so it might be that the boundary is slightly different, or that the word to exit is slightly different, or any number of other little changes that make it so that if they were peeking at someone's screen next to them who happened to be doing the same question, they wouldn't be able to cheat, but they might get the same question, and that might be a bit unfair. So one question provides an opportunity. They can effectively more or less be guaranteed to set it about 5 times before they ever receive this question again. And even if you do, it'll probably have randomization within it. And if they get to that point, you should probably have done something else with them to make sure that they don't fail again. So it is possible to have 3 questions. It would be interesting to see what people's opinion is later on about whether 3 or 1 is better. Like I said, it provides that opportunity for a reset. You can set this effectively as many times as you wish, or the kids can set it as many times as they wish. It takes about a lesson. And it needs to be done obviously in exam conditions without other things open, so that they aren't using AI or their friend to help answer, and that's probably about all. It would be nice, Henry, if you can go over maybe if some of the people aren't signed in here, what the process is for creating a class, and then also for enrolling students in the class.
Yep. First, I want to quickly, Steve mentioned randomization. This is beyond what people need to know, but for the DNA one, for example, it will ask them to enter a string or a sequence or a pattern or a segment or a value or a structure or a code, and the word to exit will be one of these bunch of words. And so if you multiply that together, you get some big number of potential questions that it could be. They're structurally algorithmically, but if a student is copying and pasting from someone else, it's very likely it's going to be wrong. Now, if you want to make a class, I believe behind my Zoom panel that's taking the top of my screen, there's a link on Tequity, which will take, or also there's a Google form for signing up here. So if you open this Google form, it should also be linked on Tequity.
And I'm about to link in the chat as well.
It's about to be linked in the chat. And you can fill in this form, and I'll set you up with an account. Please do not worry about me setting up accounts. Setting up accounts takes me about a minute of my time. If you're really curious in the process, I go to site administration, I go to courses, I manage the courses, and I click the clone course button from my default course up the top. There's a clone course button, and suddenly your course is essentially set up. Now, one thing I do have to do is set everyone with an enrollment key, so I'll go to, maybe I'll show off. Steve, are you particularly worried about? Actually, I'll go to this one. So once you have your course, this one's my practice course, you can go to participants, and you can go to enrollment methods, and this will be enabled. It's self-enrollment for students, that will already be enabled. You can go to settings, and there's a thing called an enrollment key. Now, I will have set something much nicer, but it is a randomly generated Moodle string. I normally set it to be something like the school name followed by a bunch of numbers. It will be in the email that I send to you, and so then your students, if they want to join a course, they can enroll in a course if they have that key. This stops students from cross-pollinating and joining the wrong classes by mistake because you have to give them the enrollment key if they want to join your course. So that's how you have students enroll. What was the other thing, sorry, Steve?
I think that was it, wasn't it?
All right, cool.
I put the sign up form. I put a link to the slideshow is in the chat now, and I put a link to the sign up form that Henry can deal with your classes if you wish to be added in.
And genuinely, it's no issue. It takes me like 5 minutes of my day to do everyone. And I say at the end of all my welcome emails, I say, please email me if you have any questions. I do genuinely mean that. Please email me. I love talking about this. I love helping out. This is what I like doing. So please do not feel as if you're taking up my time. You are, but it's something I want to do.
One thing we haven't mentioned yet, which would be really nice, Henry, if you want to take a quick look at the Always On course so that the kids can practice.
I would love to take a look at the Always On course so that the kids can practice. I have the courses categorized here. There are the 2025 courses. You won't need to worry about the 2024 courses because that was last year. And there's one practice course called Always On. This has some questions to get introduced to CodeRunner. And so these are things like how to read an input, how to do output, how to print things. These are just getting slightly familiar with the interface as a general programming tool. And then there are some NCEA style questions which students can answer, and they'll be marked using the systems rules the way that they'll be marked in the summative assessment. So it's like formative assessment. It's to get them used to the system once again, get them used to the idea of doing their testing and being super precise, because if they're asked to say enter your input and they say input please, they're going to get marked wrong. So the formative Always On course is to get students familiar with the system and understanding that you need to be precise when you're programming, you need to be writing your test cases and get them into that mindset. One question that I'd like to ask is, for formative assessment, we just show children all of the test cases. Maybe it would be better if we only showed them the example test cases like in summative, but then it feels a bit meaner. So I'd love to hit better devs to make them more prepared. So I'd love to hear what people's thoughts on that are. But yeah, it's a course that anyone can enroll in, including you right now. Even if you're not a teacher, you can enroll in this course with the key Always On. So
welcome is the key. If you're not signed in and you try to sign up to this course, the key is actually listed in the course description. So anyone can enroll. I was using it, I actually used it today because the NCEA style feedback that it gives you is quite extensive for the kids. It brings up key errors that they make. Henry's tool, believe it or not, actually does test for comments, and when kids run their tests and they see they haven't added comments in, they suddenly realize how important comments are, and then they'll have to go back and do it. So if they haven't already developed that habit, then we're enforcing the habit. The one thing about it is, as well as there is extensive feedback, and you'll get the question, what are concerning literals? And it's in the standard. Standard, but until they make the mistake, I don't remember what that is. So I don't think we really go over it, but it's just removing any hard-coded values from it. But this is a great place to go for kids to prep for the test. And it's like an invaluable way that you're not gonna, when they finally go do the test, if that was the first time they ever saw CodeRunner, it would be a bit of a disadvantage because you might be testing whether they can use CodeRunner or not, whether they can program or not. So this is a great place. This is fully like 100% teacher assisted, loads of feedback, and they get the chance to make lots of mistakes here before they do the test, because this year's the new level 1 requires that you are very hands off when they're actually doing assessment. As you know, any assistance deems their work to be sort of like not acceptable for assessment. So you have to be hands off when they come to the full test. I did want to talk a little bit about the teaching and learning side of it. One of the things about it, if you are keen to do this, obviously you'll want to prep them enough to do Python. You want to, so that they know all of the things that they need to pass, which they must know lists, and obviously sequence selection and iteration. So they need to know how to do conditionals for if statements. They need to know for loops and while loops. They need to know about storing variables and storing constants. They need to be able to iterate through a list. They need to be able to append to a list. They don't really need to be able to pop from lists or delete from lists. And what I've found is if you minimize the entire achievement criteria down to a structure, you end up with almost the same algorithm. So the secret sauce for teaching this is that nearly every problem is a variation on the same algorithm, where they'll create a list, they'll enter some sort of loop, almost always a while loop. I do teach while true. I know it's bad, and Henry will get grumpy with me, but if you do while true, you just have to ask for the input once, whereas if you do it the other way, you've got to ask for it multiple times. At the start before you enter loop, and then after, and then if you want to error proof that, you have to do the try and except within multiple locations. But a while true allows for a very simple algorithm where you enter the while true, you ask for the input, you then check to see if it's the exit criteria, because there's always an exit criteria. There'll be different inputs, and an exit or whatever. They'll then, if it's not an exit, so if it's an exit, they'll break. If it's not, they'll then just process that input, and usually involves conditionally adding stuff to the list or not adding stuff to the list. And then when the entire loop is broken, when the exit criteria is met, they'll need to effectively print out the list or count the items in the list, or it's almost always the same algorithm. And if you are benefiting from watching this, then you'll be able to prep your kids quite well for the fact that more or less that will be the same stuff. Every single problem, and one of the issues that you will have, and particularly with kids whose first language isn't English, is that problem decomposition. They can know the syntax of Python, but we can't tell them exactly what to write. So they'll have to be able to kind of like work out what they need to do, and then be able to like programmatically make that work within their code. And they do have time, and they do have that space to do it, but it does require that repetition to be able to see the problem, understand the problem, and decompose the problem. So it's the only way of doing it, and it's great, but it does require practice, which is why the always on, I highly recommend that you go through as a teacher all of the problems in always on, debug and help them debug and help them work out how to do it, and then that will give them a really great grounding for taking the actual full assessment, where they will get very little feedback and no help from you.
I saw a couple of questions in the chat. One was, can students run their own tests in the practice environment? The answer is, yep, we have a scratch pad here, which is the same as in the formal assessment. You notice it looks slightly nicer right now. That's because this one doesn't log the test case, so we can use the nicer scratch pad, but I will probably change it to be the one that logs the test cases just for that consistency. So yes, students can run the test cases here. Now,
do you know what the untested questions are?
Yes, so the untested questions are a thing that existed back in 2024. They do not exist in any of the 2025 courses. They were questions that, basically, they're the randomized questions that we made that weren't verified. We didn't know if they'd be good or not, and so I said in the sign-up form back in 2024, would you be willing to use these experimental questions? Most teachers said yes, and so the untested questions are those randomized ones, I believe. Yes. Unless untested questions, let me just check on course. Oh no, actually, untested questions are what are the... No, that's just a copy of the formative quiz. That's just a copy of Always On. Again, only in the 2024 courses, so you won't need to worry about it in 2025 anyway.
There was a quick question about not being able to log in. The Always On is available as long as you have an account. And accounts are free to set up, so you'll just need to create yourself an account, and then you use that login to go into it. The Always On, when you go to the top of the Always On course, it does say what the key is. It's welcome with a capital W and an exclamation at the end. And you use that as your enrollment key, and you should then get into the Always On course. So you can have a play around and write some code yourself and see how the system works before you make your kids do it.
I see a question about needing to be about that they're checking scratch pad and not submitting the code. So there used to be, or there may still be, a problem of students clicking check instead of clicking the scratch pad button. We did our best to rectify this a bit. We've changed it to say test your code. So this is the test your code button. And so hopefully it's a bit clearer now that this is for testing and this is for submitting. I might play around with the CSS to make it even more obvious, make this button even bigger and have it say run your tests or something. But hopefully it's clearer now for students that this is what you click to test. In terms of the limited to 3 options, that's not a problem anymore. We give them, they have an infinite number of attempts now because they are only ever seeing the example test cases. They will only ever see what they can see in this example box. So there's no need to limit it to 3 tests anymore because they can't get any help when they're running the tests.
Just on that same point, as a teacher, there's a couple of little things that you need to do before, as you're prepping your kids for the test. I write on my board that they need to remember they've got to use lists, because despite us going over lists over and over, they still think they'll still attempt to answer things without lists and getting all it is. So they must use lists. Just tell them that. They must add comments. You're allowed to tell them that before they go into the test, but you can't stand there and say, "Oh, we need to add a comment there." If they want excellence, they need to get rid of their literals. Again, it's entirely up to them to do that when they're writing the code for their problem. And I go over how important it is to test your code, to use the samples to test their code as well. So let them give them samples. And one of the things that's really important in teaching it as well is that they'll get themselves in a real test about try and accept before they've even written to answer the samples, or they'll try and write the entire thing to excellence level before they even click one test. And there might be 7 bugs in there, and then they'll not know which bug is overwriting which bug and which bug is hiding which bug. So they do, when they've done a lot of grok and they've not done Visual Studio Code or anything like that, or little chunks of code like you get in W3 schools, they'll write like a big solution before they run it. And so when you demo it with your kids, or you demo the Always On course, just show that you can make mistakes and read the errors and find out about that, just so that you can develop it a little bit. You'll the example kid that we saw earlier, he wrote 6 static versions before he even managed the L1 work, and he tested every single one. And then what he did was, it was a good example, because what he did was he wrote the achieved first, he wrote it to work from samples, and then he tried to refine it further by writing in the bits that would break if they were a boundary or if they were exceptional values. But he, remember, didn't see any of those tests. He had to design his own tests to test that. So he would type in something that was not a number to see that his code handled that. So that's part of it. While I'm still talking, Jed asked about, can you make your own questions? The short answer is it's probably best not to. Henry and I made most of these questions, and they've all been peer reviewed by Professor Tim Bell, among others. It is possible to write your own questions, but I would say we are intending, or someone's intending, to add to the pool of tests. It's a slow process, they're all fit for purpose, and they all as expected, and we've only had a couple of questions because they're not quite right. So
there were lots of little boxes in writing questions, and yeah, I would love to talk to you about the context of questions, because I'm always struggling for ideas. Part of the reason making questions is there's kind of ideas for context students talking about it, and it's really hard. Some of the little boxes include you need to make sure that you tag every test with either achieve, merit, excellent, or example. You need to be able to write a solution that passes all the test cases, which can be a pain because you'll get limited feedback here. And randomization is something that I'm not going to force anyone else to try and do. But I would love to write more questions, and if you have ideas for other questions that you'd be comfortable sharing, I would love to hear about them. In a similar vein, I saw someone ask about questions that were tricky to solve without using a dictionary. Those questions have been removed. There's only one question that I'm mildly worried about, and it's this question here called NCEA maps. The reason I'm worried about it is because it uses a while loop within a while loop. So this one's probably, it's about treasure hunting in X and Y coordinates. This one's probably the most difficult question. All the other ones I'm 100% happy with. This one I'm about 80% happy with. And so if a student gets the treasure hunting question and they say that it's too hard, maybe just let them generate another question, and that'll be fine.
Richard asked about, is Grok enough as a resource pass level 1? Definitely not. Grok is a great start, but you don't know what they don't know. Grok's amazing because of the teacher dashboard, where you get away from the front of the class, you get to go and help the kids who are struggling, and not have to help kids who already know what you're about to spend the next 20 minutes explaining to them. So it saves your time, but you'll definitely need to do stuff on top of that. Grok, like all those programs, is very, you do this, the light goes green, and you get a flashy bunch of firework confetti comes up and everyone feels good, but you then can't solve the problem. There is problems within Grok, but they still need extra on top of that. I would highly recommend any other stuff, even Code Combat or any other opportunity to write some Python, set them a challenge to make a calculator class and then work through it together, or run through the always on stuff if you want. Using something other than just Grok is probably the best bet, but Grok is a great start. It's a great first step for complete beginners to go in and be able to get everything that's required within level 1, including the lists. And Grok previously used to have things like string slicing and stuff that was cool but irrelevant to level 1, and that's why it took ages. It took so long to get through this stuff and not always relevant. So I'm really pleased that they've stripped it right back to just what's required, plus added in quite a few New Zealand style questions with New Zealand contexts that still that follow that sort of path, that the algorithms that they need to be able to solve the problems in the auto runner.
I do see another question I don't think we answered about, is there a time frame from when we have to run the assessment in case kids are sharing questions across schools? We didn't have, I don't believe there were any issues with that last year, but Steve, you're at a school that has lots of classes that take the assessments at lots of different times. You're more experienced to speak on that question than I am. Is that a problem?
No, we've not found it. The kids we do it under exam conditions when we have our classes all at the same point. We've run, some of the kids have come in with quite good programming ability, they've already sat it. They're unlikely to share, and even if they do, it's quite difficult for them to kind of get it right. It's almost as difficult to share it and adapt the code from someone else to this new problem than it is to just write the problem. So we haven't had any problems. We've probably got about 150 to 180 kids sitting it, and we didn't have any problems last year either with kids sharing code. We kind of tend to run it all at the same time and treat it like an exam, like being a real subject, and treat it as an exam. So they come in, they sit down, they put the bags away, put everything away, they get on, and they get that 1 hour and would stay behind because our periods are a bit shorter. The kids that weren't finished would stay behind, the others were allowed to leave, and the bell went, and it was perfect. It was good.
Although one thing you mentioned about periods being shorter, there is one way that you can sort of improve the security of your quiz. This is very much not required, but if you wanted to take multiple lessons, you can turn on the edit mode in your course in the upper right-hand corner. You turn that on, and then you click these 3 dots next to the assessment quiz, and you click the hide button. This means students will no longer be able to see that. So you do this, students can't see it anymore. Then when it's time for them to come back in the next period, you click the 3 dots, and you click the show button, and students can see it again. I know some teachers did that because they wanted the assessment to take 2 hours instead of 1 hour. I don't want to tell you how to run your assessment. If you think it should be a 3-hour assessment over 3 periods, that's up to you. And using the hide and show button is the best way to prevent students from doing it when they're at home. That's the end of my sentence.
Awesome. Are there? I think we've more or less covered everything. Is there any other questions? Yeah, I do love otherwise, great plan. It's very easy to
What we might do if it's right is we might close the page now and any evaluations they can ask as well. I just want to make to you guys say very for all of the time we've spent in the background doing this right for our teachers and in this, hopefully using loads of taking pictures like myself to not only hit the assessment but the students will get, but at least feel like I know what I'm doing when it comes to being consistent and mapping and say. So keep a go. So just close the pages so that we can go back into our lives and everything works for us when we're younger if we're home. Pakataki te hau ki te ure, pakataki te hau ki te tunga, kia ngā kiri ki te uta, kia ngā tātaki ki mai, i hia kia ngā te atura, ki te o ki hukai hauhu, te hei, muri ora, and I'll stop recording.